I watched through my security camera as three figures crept across my property in the darkness. They moved like thieves toward my boathouse, flashlights cutting through the night air. The woman leading them was Karen Martinez, president of our homeowners association. In her hands, she carried a crowbar. My heart pounded as I realized what was happening. This was not some routine inspection or neighborly visit. This was breaking and entering. The same woman who had spent months harassing me about paint colors and dock violations was now committing a felony on my property. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 24 hours earlier, I thought I was fighting a losing battle against an overzealous HOA president. I had no idea that Karen was about to hand me the evidence I needed to destroy her completely. That night changed everything, because sometimes when you push someone too far, they push back harder than you ever imagined. 15 years ago, I bought my dream home on Lake Serena. After working double shifts as a construction foreman for over 2 decades, I finally had enough saved for a down payment on waterfront property. The house itself was modest, but it came with something priceless. A beautiful wooden boathouse that stretched out over the crystal-clear water. The boathouse was not just a building to me. It was freedom. Every morning, I would walk down the weathered dock with my coffee mug, breathing in the fresh lake air and watching the sunrise paint the water gold. My fishing boat and small pontoon were docked inside, ready for weekend adventures that washed away the stress of construction deadlines and demanding clients. The Lake Serena community felt like paradise when I first moved in. Friendly neighbors waved from their yards. Children rode bicycles down the quiet streets. The homeowners association seemed reasonable, focused mainly on keeping common areas clean and organizing the annual summer barbecue. I paid my dues without complaint and attended meetings when I could. For over a decade, life was peaceful. I maintained my property carefully, kept my boats in good condition, and built genuine friendships with neighbors who shared my love of lake living. The boathouse became my sanctuary, filled with fishing gear, life jackets, and memories of countless peaceful evenings on the water. Then Karen Martinez moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago. Karen was a retired real estate agent in her early 60s with silver hair always pulled into a perfect bun and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. Within 2 weeks of moving in, she had volunteered for the HOA board. Within a month, she was running for president. Within 3 months, she had won the election by promising to restore property values and community standards. Her first target was waterfront properties. It started small. A letter in my mailbox complaining that my dock needed power washing. Another notice about boat covers that were supposedly the wrong color. I ignored the first few complaints, figuring they would fade away like most HOA drama, but Karen was just getting started. One Saturday morning, I was organizing tackle boxes in my boathouse when I heard footsteps on my dock. I looked up to see Karen standing in my doorway, clipboard in hand and a frown on her face. "Mr. Thompson, we need to discuss some violations," she said without any greeting or introduction. I set down my tackle box and straightened up. What violations would those be? "Your boathouse has unauthorized modifications that violate community standards," she replied, making notes on her clipboard. "This structure needs immediate attention." I looked around my boathouse, confused. Nothing had changed since I bought the property 15 years earlier. "What modifications are you talking about?" Karen pointed at the wooden shelving I had installed to organize my fishing equipment. Those shelves were not part of the original structure, and this workbench violates the aesthetic guidelines for waterfront buildings. My blood started to boil. The workbench was a simple wooden table where I cleaned fish and maintained my boats. The shelves held life jackets and fishing rods. Nothing about them seemed unreasonable or community-threatening. "Those guidelines did not exist when I moved here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Karen smiled coldly. "They exist now. You have 30 days to bring this structure into compliance or face daily fines." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing in my boathouse with a sinking feeling in my stomach. I had no idea that this was just the beginning of a war I never wanted to fight. Over the next 2 months, Karen transformed our peaceful community into a surveillance state. New rules appeared in my mailbox every week, each one more ridiculous than the last. Dock accessories could only be certain colors. Boat covers needed HOA approval. Even the type of rope used for mooring had to meet newly created specifications. I was not the only target, but I was clearly the primary one. Other waterfront homeowners received occasional violation notices, but mine arrived like clockwork every Tuesday morning. My dock was too cluttered. My boat was parked incorrectly. My fishing equipment was visible from the street. The most frustrating part was watching my neighbors fold under the pressure. Jim Patterson, who owned the property next to mine, received a notice about his deck furniture and immediately threw everything into storage rather than fight. Sarah Chen got cited for her flower boxes and removed them the same day. Nobody wanted to rock the boat, so to speak. I tried to be reasonable at first. I repainted my dock railings from forest green to the newly approved lake blue. I reorganized my boathouse to hide fishing equipment from street view. I even bought new boat covers in the HOA-approved colors, spending nearly $300 of my own money to keep the peace. But Corinne was never satisfied. Every time I fixed one violation, she found two more. She began showing up at my property unannounced, walking around my dock and boathouse with her clipboard, taking photographs and measurements like a crime scene investigator. During this time, I learned more about Corinne's background from other neighbors. She had been a successful real estate agent in Tampa before retiring and moving to Lake Serena. According to Mary Williams, who had known Corinne in Tampa, she had developed a reputation for aggressive tactics and boundary-pushing behavior that eventually cost her several major clients. More concerning was what I learned about Corinne's allies on the HOA board. She had recruited Bob Henderson and Lisa Garcia, two homeowners who lived on interior streets and clearly resented the higher property values of waterfront homes. Bob was a retired accountant who seemed to enjoy wielding power over his neighbors. Lisa was a school administrator who treated every HOA meeting like a disciplinary hearing. Together, the three of them formed a voting bloc that could pass any rule they wanted, and they clearly wanted to make life difficult for waterfront property owners. The breaking point came during a community meeting in October. Karen stood at the front of the room with a poster board covered in photographs of waterfront properties, including several close-up shots of my boathouse. "As you can see," she announced to the 25 residents in attendance, "waterfront properties have been allowed to deteriorate without proper oversight. These structures violate our community covenants and negatively impact property values for all residents." I raised my hand. What specific covenants are being violated? Karen shuffled through a stack of papers. The original community covenants from 1987 clearly state that waterfront structures must maintain the natural aesthetic of the lake environment. Your boathouse contains modifications that were never properly approved. "What modifications?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Interior alterations, additional storage structures, and non-conforming equipment displays." she read from her notes. I felt my face getting hot. She was talking about my fishing rod holders and the small workbench where I cleaned fish. These were not modifications. They were basic furniture that any boat owner would have. "I would like to see these covenants you are referencing," I said. Karen's smile became even colder. "You will receive a formal notice requiring a complete interior inspection of your boathouse within 7 days. If violations are confirmed, you will have 30 days to bring the structure into compliance or face escalating daily fines beginning at $50 per day." The room fell silent. Other waterfront homeowners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but nobody spoke up in my defense. I realized I was completely alone in this fight. After the meeting, I approached several neighbors privately. Jim Patterson shook his head when I asked for support. "I cannot afford to become a target," he whispered. "I am sorry, but you are on your own." That night, I sat in my boathouse watching the sunset reflect off the lake. For the first time since moving to Lake Serena, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Karen had turned my sanctuary into a source of stress and anxiety, but I was not ready to surrender. I had built this life through hard work and sacrifice. If Karen wanted a fight, she was about to get one. The formal inspection notice arrived exactly 7 days later, just as Karen had promised. But what I found in my mailbox was not what I expected. Instead of a simple request for access, Karen had scheduled a mandatory structural compliance inspection for the following Monday at 10 a.m. sharp. The notice listed 3 people who would be conducting the inspection: Karen Martinez as HOA president, Bob Henderson as compliance officer, and something called third-party construction assessment, represented by a contractor named Mike Stevens. The document looked official, with letterhead and legal-sounding language about community covenants and property rights. I called my neighbor Jim Patterson, who had worked in property management before retiring. "This does not look right," he said after reading the notice over the phone. "HOAs can inspect common areas and external property features, but I have never heard of mandatory interior inspections of private structures." Despite my growing suspicions, I felt trapped. The notice threatened immediate legal action and daily fines if I refused access. At $50 per day, I could be looking at over $1,800 in penalties within a month. I could not afford that kind of financial pressure. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly. I waited at my kitchen window, watching Karen march down my dock with Bob and a man I did not recognize carrying a clipboard and measuring tools. They knocked on my front door instead of going directly to the boathouse. "Mr. Thompson, we are here for the scheduled inspection," Karen announced when I opened the door. "I did not give permission for interior inspection," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Karen held up the notice. "This is not a request. This is a requirement under community covenants. If you refuse access, you will face immediate legal action and accumulating daily fines beginning today." I looked at Bob and the contractor. Neither of them would make eye contact with me. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, but I could not afford to call Karen's bluff if she was serious about the legal threats. "Fine," I said, "but I want to be present during the entire inspection." The next 30 minutes were the most humiliating of my adult life. The 3 of them walked through my boathouse like investigators at a crime scene. They photographed everything from multiple angles. They measured wall spaces, dock clearances, and ceiling heights. They opened my storage boxes and examined my fishing equipment like it was evidence of wrongdoing. Mike Stevens, the contractor, seemed uncomfortable with the whole process. While Karen and Bob took notes and photos, He mostly just nodded and agreed with whatever they pointed out. I got the impression he was being paid to validate conclusions that had already been reached. "This workbench is clearly a structural modification," Karen declared, running her hand along the simple wooden table where I cleaned fish. "And these shelving units were installed without proper permits or HOA approval." "Those are just basic furniture," I protested. "Every boat owner has fishing rod holders and cleaning stations." "Not according to the original community standards," Bob chimed in, consulting a thick folder of documents. "Waterfront structures were intended to maintain natural lake aesthetics without personal modifications or storage additions." The contractor measured my workbench and shelving units, writing down dimensions that Karen carefully recorded. They spent extra time photographing what they called non-conforming equipment displays, which were actually just my life jackets hanging on wall hooks and my fishing nets stored in corner brackets. After they finished, Karen presented me with a preliminary violation report. The list was 3 pages long and included everything from unauthorized interior modifications to improper equipment storage to aesthetic noncompliance with community waterfront standards. "You have 30 days to remove all non-conforming elements and restore this structure to its original condition," Karen announced. "Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $50 beginning on day 31, escalating to $100 per day after 60 days. I stared at the report in disbelief. According to their assessment, I would need to remove my workbench, all shelving, my fishing rod holders, and even the wall hooks where I hung life jackets. Essentially, I would need to gut my boathouse and turn it into an empty shell." "This is ridiculous," I said. "You are asking me to make my boathouse completely unusable." Karen smiled with satisfaction. "You are asking me to make our community compliant with established standards. If you cannot maintain this structure properly, perhaps you should consider selling to someone who can." That last comment hit me like a physical blow. For the first time, I understood what this was really about. Karen was not trying to improve community standards. She was trying to force me to sell my waterfront property. After they left, I sat in my boathouse holding the violation report and feeling completely defeated. 30 days to destroy everything that made this space functional and meaningful to me. 30 days before financial penalties would begin draining my savings account. That night I barely slept, but somewhere in the darkness, my despair began transforming into something else: anger, determination, and the growing suspicion that Karen had made a serious mistake by pushing me this far. The next morning, I did something I should have done months earlier. I started fighting back with research instead of compliance. If Karen wanted to play games with documents and legal threats, I was going to learn the rules better than she did. My first stop was the county courthouse, where I requested copies of the original Lake Serena Community Covenants from 1987. The clerk pulled a thick file folder and made copies of documents that Karen had been citing, but never actually shown me. What I discovered made my blood boil. The original covenants contained no restrictions on interior modifications to private structures like boathouses. They mentioned maintaining community aesthetic standards, but specifically defined those standards as exterior paint colors, landscaping choices, and architectural consistency. There was absolutely nothing about fishing equipment, workbenches, or interior storage solutions. More importantly, the covenants explicitly protected waterfront structures as essential amenities that homeowners could modify and maintain according to their individual needs, provided exterior appearances remained consistent with lakefront community standards. Karen had been lying about the legal foundation for her harassment campaign. I spent the rest of that week becoming an expert on HOA law, property rights, and community covenant enforcement. I learned that mandatory interior inspections of private structures required either court orders or specific legal violations related to health and safety. Karen's inspection had been completely illegal. But my research was just getting started. I decided to investigate Karen herself. A basic internet search revealed disturbing patterns in Karen's background. She had been involved in HOA disputes in 3 previous communities where she had lived. In Tampa, she had been removed from an HOA board after allegations of harassment and abuse of authority. In Orlando, she had been sued by 2 neighbors for property damage during an unauthorized compliance inspection that had resulted in criminal trespassing charges. Most revealing was a news article from a Tampa neighborhood newsletter describing Karen as someone who used HOA regulations as weapons against neighbors she personally disliked, particularly targeting property owners whose homes she believed she could force into foreclosure. The pattern was clear. Karen was not an overzealous community volunteer. She was a predator who moved from neighborhood to neighborhood, gaining positions of authority, and then abusing that authority to harass homeowners into selling their properties. My next discovery was even more damaging. Property records showed that Karen had financial connections to Lakeside Development Group, a company that specialized in purchasing and redeveloping waterfront properties. Her brother-in-law, Michael Martinez, was listed as a primary investor in the company. Suddenly, everything made sense. Karen was not trying to improve community standards. She was trying to drive down waterfront property values so her family's development company could purchase homes at below-market prices. I also discovered that Karen's own property had multiple code violations that she had never addressed. Her fence exceeded height limitations set by county regulations. Her driveway expansion had been completed without proper permits. Her landscaping blocked sidewalk access in violation of municipal codes. The woman who had been harassing me about fishing rod holders was living in a property that actually violated real laws and regulations. But the most important discovery came when I researched the legal status of Karen's 30-day ultimatum. A conversation with a property rights attorney revealed that HOA enforcement actions required proper notice, board votes, and appeal processes that Karen had completely ignored. "What she did to you was not just wrong," the attorney explained. "It was illegal harassment disguised as official HOA business. You have grounds for both criminal complaints and civil litigation." I learned that Karen's inspection, her ultimatum, and her threats of daily fines were all legally meaningless. She had no authority to make those demands, and I had no obligation to comply with them. More importantly, I discovered that several other waterfront homeowners had received similar harassment from Karen, but nobody had challenged her authority or investigated her background. She had been counting on intimidation and ignorance to get away with her scheme. The attorney also explained something called abuse of process, which occurs when someone uses legal-sounding threats and official-appearing documents to coerce behavior they have no legal right to demand. Karen's entire campaign against me fell into that category. Armed with this information, I felt like a different person. Instead of a helpless homeowner being bullied by an aggressive HOA president, I was now someone with facts, evidence, and legal options. That weekend, I made copies of everything I had discovered. Karen's background of HOA abuse in previous communities, her financial connections to the development company, the original community covenants that protected my property rights, documentation of her own property violations, legal research proving her harassment campaign was illegal. I also began reaching out to other waterfront homeowners, sharing what I had learned and building a coalition of neighbors who were tired of Karen's abuse, but had been afraid to stand up to her individually. By Sunday night, I had a plan. Karen had spent months putting me on the defensive, forcing me to react to her attacks and comply with her demands, but I was done playing defense. It was time to go on offense. Monday morning, I filed formal complaints against Karen Martinez with 3 different government agencies. The County Code Enforcement Office received detailed documentation of her property violations, complete with photographs and municipal code citations. The State Attorney's Office received evidence of her pattern of harassment and abuse of HOA authority. The County Clerk's Office received a formal complaint about unauthorized inspections and illegal ultimatums. Each complaint was professional, thoroughly documented, and focused on specific violations of actual laws rather than made-up HOA regulations. I wanted Karen to experience what it felt like to receive official notices in her mailbox and face real consequences for her actions. My next step was organizing the waterfront homeowners who had been suffering in silence. I called Jim Patterson first, sharing everything I had discovered about Karen's background and the illegal nature of her enforcement actions. "You mean I did not have to throw away my deck furniture?" Jim asked, sounding stunned. "None of us had to comply with any of her demands," I explained. "She has no legal authority to make those requirements. The original community covenants actually protect our right to use our waterfront properties as we see fit." Within 2 days, I had spoken with 8 waterfront homeowners who had received harassment from Karen. Every one of them had a similar story of escalating demands, threats of fines, and pressure to modify or remove perfectly reasonable property features. Sarah Chen had spent over $500 removing flower boxes that were actually protected under the original landscaping provisions. Mike Rodriguez had repainted his entire dock based on color requirements that did not exist in any legitimate HOA document. Together, we formed what I called the Lake Serena Property Rights Coalition. Our first action was demanding an emergency meeting with the full HOA board to address Karen's unauthorized activities and illegal harassment campaign. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening. I spent 3 days preparing a presentation that would expose Karen's abuse of authority and demonstrate the legal protections that waterfront homeowners actually possessed. I also took a more aggressive step. Through my attorney, I sent Karen a formal demand letter requiring her to immediately cease all harassment activities, retract her illegal ultimatum, and provide written acknowledgement that her inspection and enforcement actions had no legal foundation. The demand letter was delivered by certified mail and copied to every member of the HOA board. For the first time since this conflict began, Karen was the one receiving official legal documents and facing consequences for her behavior. Her response was swift and predictable. She escalated. 2 days after receiving the demand letter, Karen organized what she called a community safety meeting to discuss the growing problem of non-compliant waterfront properties threatening community standards and property values. She sent notices to every homeowner in Lake Serena, describing waterfront properties as aesthetic violations and potential safety hazards that required immediate community action. She was trying to turn non-waterfront residents against us by claiming we were somehow damaging their property values and community reputation. The strategy might have worked if I had not done my homework, but I was ready for this battle. I organized counter-outreach to non-waterfront residents, sharing the actual community covenants and explaining how Karen's abuse of authority threatened everyone's property rights, not just waterfront owners. If she could make up fake rules to harass boat owners today, she could target anyone tomorrow. More importantly, I had evidence that Karen's real motivation was not community improvement, but personal financial gain through her family's development company connections. The Thursday night HOA meeting was standing room only. Karen clearly expected to use community pressure to force waterfront homeowners into compliance with her fake regulations. Instead, she found herself facing a room full of neighbors who understood her real agenda. I presented my evidence methodically and professionally. The original community covenants that protected waterfront property rights, documentation of Karen's pattern of HOA abuse in previous communities, evidence of her financial connections to the development company, proof that her inspection and ultimatum were illegal. When I finished, the room was silent. Board members Bob Henderson and Lisa Garcia looked uncomfortable and refused to make eye contact with Karen. Even residents who had initially supported Karen's community standards campaign seemed shocked by the evidence of harassment and potential corruption. Karen tried to defend herself by attacking my presentation as lies and personal attacks designed to avoid compliance with legitimate community standards. But when I challenged her to produce the specific covenants and legal authorities she had been citing for months, she could not do it. The meeting ended with the board voting to suspend all pending waterfront property enforcement actions, pending a complete review of community covenants and HOA authority. Karen was visibly furious but had no choice but to accept the board's decision. As people filed out of the meeting, several non-waterfront residents approached me privately to express support and concern about Karen's behavior. I realized that her attempt to create community division had backfired, revealing her as the problem rather than the solution. But I also knew that Karen would not give up easily. Someone with her history of neighborhood conflicts and abuse of authority would not retreat just because of one setback. I was right to be cautious. Karen's most desperate and illegal action was still to come. 3 weeks after the community meeting, I installed security cameras around my property. Call it intuition or paranoia, but something about Karen's silence made me nervous. She had not attended the last 2 HOA meetings, had not responded to my attorney's demand letter, and had stopped her regular harassment activities. For someone with her history of escalating conflicts, the quiet felt ominous. The cameras were small, wireless, and motion-activated. One covered my front yard and driveway. Another monitored the dock and boathouse from my back deck. A third provided a wide-angle view of my entire waterfront area. All 3 were connected to my phone, sending instant alerts and recording everything to cloud storage. I had no idea how important that decision would become. On a Tuesday night in late November, I was watching television when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the waterfront camera. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. I opened the app expecting to see a raccoon or stray cat triggering the sensor. Instead, I saw 3 human figures moving across my property toward the boathouse. My heart started pounding as I recognized the lead figure. Karen Martinez, dressed in dark clothing and carrying what looked like a crowbar or pry bar in her right hand. Behind her were 2 people I did not immediately recognize, both carrying flashlights and what appeared to be tools or equipment. I watched in real time as they approached my boathouse. Karen tested the door handle, found it locked, and then began working with the crowbar to force entry. The other two individuals stood watch while she broke into my property. I immediately called 911, speaking quietly so they would not hear me through the walls. "This is an emergency. I have 3 people breaking into a building on my property right now. I am watching it happen through security cameras." The dispatcher asked for my address and confirmed that officers were being dispatched immediately. She stayed on the line while I continued watching the break-in unfold on my phone screen. Karen and her accomplices were inside my boathouse now, moving around with flashlights and taking photographs. Based on their behavior, they appeared to be placing objects in different locations and documenting where they put them. "It looks like they are planting evidence," I told the dispatcher. The dispatcher confirmed that police units were less than 5 minutes away and advised me to stay inside my house until officers arrived. Those 5 minutes felt like hours. I watched Karen and her crew continue their illegal activity, clearly believing they were hidden from observation. They had no idea that every moment was being recorded in high definition and automatically uploaded to secure cloud storage. When I heard the police sirens approaching, I watched Karen and the other 2 people freeze inside my boathouse. They turned off their flashlights and tried to exit quickly, but blue and red flashing lights were already illuminating my dock. "Police, stop right there." I met the officers at my front door and immediately showed them the live camera feed on my phone. They could see Karen and her accomplices clearly visible inside my boathouse, attempting to hide behind my boats. "That woman is Karen Martinez, president of our homeowners association," I explained. "She has been harassing me for months about fake HOA violations. It looks like she broke into my boathouse to plant evidence." The officers approached the boathouse with flashlights and ordered the 3 intruders to come out with their hands visible. Karen emerged first, still holding the crowbar. Behind her came Bob Henderson, the HOA board member, and Mike Stevens, the contractor who had participated in Karen's illegal inspection. "This is a misunderstanding," Karen declared loudly. "We are conducting official HOA business related to community covenant violations." The lead officer, Sergeant Rodriguez, looked at me. "Do you give permission for HOA inspections of this building?" "Absolutely not," I replied. "Especially not at midnight with crowbars. This is criminal trespassing and breaking and entering." Sergeant Rodriguez examined the damaged door frame where Karen had forced entry. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for breaking and entering, criminal trespassing, and destruction of property." Karen's face went white as the officer began reading her Miranda rights. Bob Henderson and Mike Stevens were also handcuffed and placed in separate patrol cars. While the arrests were taking place, I examined my boathouse to see what Karen and her accomplices had been doing inside. Sure enough, I found several items that had not been there before. A can of paint thinner placed near my workbench. Fishing lines stretched across walkways in dangerous configurations. A small bag of what looked like illegal fireworks hidden behind my boat. "They were planting evidence," I told Sergeant Rodriguez, "trying to create safety violations they could use to justify their harassment campaign." The officer photographed everything exactly as we found it, including the planted evidence and the damage to my door. More importantly, my security cameras had recorded the entire crime, providing indisputable proof of Karen's criminal intent. As the patrol cars drove away with Karen, Bob, and Mike in custody, I felt a mixture of vindication and exhaustion. After months of harassment, threats, and illegal intimidation, Karen had finally crossed a line that would bring real consequences. But I also felt sad. This entire conflict could have been avoided if Karen had simply respected property rights and community standards, instead of using her position to bully neighbors and pursue personal financial gain. The next morning, news of the arrest spread through Lake Serena like wildfire. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak up against Karen suddenly felt safe to share their own stories of harassment and intimidation. By evening, I had received calls from 12 different homeowners describing their experiences with Karen's abuse of authority. Several wanted to know about joining potential legal action against her. Karen Martinez had spent months trying to destroy my peaceful life at Lake Serena. Instead, she had destroyed herself. The criminal case against Karen Martinez moved quickly through the court system. The security camera footage provided indisputable evidence of breaking and entering, criminal trespassing, and attempted evidence tampering. Her two accomplices, Bob Henderson and Mike Stevens, agreed to testify against her in exchange for reduced charges. Karen initially tried to claim she was conducting legitimate HOA business, but that defense collapsed when the prosecutor presented evidence of her previous harassment complaints in other communities and her financial connections to the development company targeting waterfront properties. 3 months after her arrest, Karen pled guilty to multiple criminal charges. She received 2 years of probation, community service, and was ordered to pay restitution for property damage and legal expenses. More importantly, she was permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position in the state. Karen also lost her real estate license due to the criminal convictions. Within 6 months of her arrest, she had moved away from Lake Serena entirely. According to neighborhood gossip, she relocated to a different state where her criminal record would be less well known. The civil lawsuit I filed against Karen took longer to resolve, but was ultimately even more satisfying. My attorney was able to demonstrate a clear pattern of harassment, illegal intimidation, and abuse of authority that had caused significant emotional distress and financial damage. The settlement agreement provided compensation for all the money I had spent complying with Karen's fake regulations, reimbursement for legal expenses, and additional damages for the months of stress and anxiety she had caused. Karen was also required to provide written acknowledgement that all her enforcement actions against my property had been illegal and without foundation. More importantly, the lawsuit led to a complete restructuring of the Lake Serena HOA. The settlement agreement required new board elections, implementation of transparency requirements, and establishment of appeal processes for any future enforcement actions. The new HOA leadership was dramatically different from Karen's authoritarian approach. Instead of looking for violations and reasons to harass homeowners, they focused on genuine community improvement projects like playground maintenance, common area landscaping, and neighborhood social events. Property rights became clearly defined and protected. Waterfront homeowners were officially recognized as having special considerations for boat storage, dock maintenance, and lake access that other residents did not require. The original community covenants were republished and distributed to every homeowner so that everyone understood their actual rights and responsibilities. My boathouse became something of a symbol in the neighborhood. After removing the evidence that Karen had planted, I restored it to full functionality with my workbench, shelving, and fishing equipment exactly as they had been before her harassment campaign began. Other waterfront homeowners followed my example. Jim Patterson reinstalled his deck furniture. Sarah Chen replanted her flower boxes. Mike Rodriguez repainted his dock in the original colors he preferred. Everyone reclaimed the property rights that Karen had tried to steal through intimidation and fake regulations. The broader community became stronger and more united after Karen's removal. Without her divisive leadership and attempts to create conflict between waterfront and inland residents, neighbors began working together on genuine improvements rather than fighting over manufactured violations. I received thank you notes from several homeowners who had been afraid to challenge Karen individually, but were grateful that someone had been willing to stand up to her bullying and expose her illegal activities. The security cameras I had installed to catch Karen remained in place, but they now provided peace of mind rather than evidence gathering for criminal activity. My home felt secure and private again. Most satisfying was returning to the simple pleasures that had drawn me to Lake Serena in the first place. Morning coffee on my dock, watching sunrise reflect off the calm water, weekend fishing trips launched from my fully functional boathouse, evening pontoon rides with friends and neighbors who had become genuine allies rather than silent observers. The whole experience taught me important lessons about standing up to bullies and protecting individual rights against abuse of authority. Karen had counted on intimidation, ignorance, and social pressure to get away with her harassment campaign. When those tactics were met with research, legal action, and community organizing, her entire scheme collapsed. I also learned that most people want to do the right thing but are often afraid to act when they feel isolated and vulnerable. By taking the first stand and providing leadership, I had made it possible for other homeowners to find their courage and speak up against abuse. Lake Serena returned to being the peaceful waterfront community I had fallen in love with 15 years earlier. My boathouse remained my sanctuary, filled with boats, fishing gear, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, when you fight back against injustice, you actually win.